Thank you very much, and a very good evening, everyone. Very nice to be here to speak to you. Slightly different platform than I'm used to. I feel like a bit like a cage fighter with this top row, so I know I'm relatively safe from the audience. I don't think many are going to come over the top. I work for AFBI as a breeding consultant. I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about the principles of genetic selection within the sheep industry. It doesn't really matter whether we're talking about cygnet figures, sill figures from New Zealand, sheep island figures. The principles are exactly the same. So I happen to be the manager of Cygnet. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about why genetic improvement is important, how to use the information out there, and then hopefully link into the RAM Compare project results as a warm-up act for Orally in a moment. So sort of starting with the basics, all of you have bought rams at various points, and it isn't the easiest job in the world. If we head to the sale and we buy the biggest, most beautiful looking ram at the sale, we've probably found the person with the biggest feed bucket. We haven't necessarily found the ram with the best genetics. At the end of the day, the appearance of these animals are due to both the genetics and the environment, but the only bit passed from one generation to the next is going to be that animal's genetics. So we need a way of teasing that out, and we need a measure of genetic merit to help us make the selection decisions in the same way that we do in the dairy industry and many other livestock industries. So what do we do within Cygnet to actually produce these measures of genetic merit? Well, we collect information about the pedigree of an animal so that we're pulling together data from that animal's entire family tree and all the known relatives. And we're collecting information about the performance of that animal and the other lambs in the flock. So we're looking at growth rate, we're looking at muscling, and we're trying to tease out all the different sources of variation that will influence performance, be that the animal's age or its sex or the flock feeding effect, because the only bit of interest to us is going to be that animal's genetic merit. And in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do, to tease out these influences. So the genetic merit is then expressed as these things that we call EBVs, or estimated breeding values, which indicate genetic superiority for specific traits. We can then tease the data out a bit further to create breeding indexes, and I'll go on to talk about that. That's a way of ranking animals for a specific breeding objective. And we also have accuracy values, and that tells us how much is known about a particular animal's record. So that's how we actually go from having pedigree data to having something that will help us to select our rams. So I'll just give you an example. This one happens to be a Charolais ram that we've pulled off the database. We've got a set of breeding values for him shown here for a range of traits. So we've got growth to 8 weeks, the prolificacy of his daughters, maternal ability, so genes for milk production, growth rate through to scanning time, muscling and fatness, so 2 indicators of carcass attributes. And they're real units of measurement, so a figure of +7 means an extra 7 kilos of growth from this particular animal. And generally positive figures are better, so a slight positive on the fat depth, that means that animal's going to be slightly fatter. If I wanted leaner progeny, then I could choose one with a slight negative. So those are the EBVs. And then next to it, we've got the accuracy values. So that tells me how much is known. This is a ram with lots and lots of progeny on the ground, so he's got figures up in the high 90s. Young, unproven rams will typically have lower figures. Now that's all well and good, but it doesn't actually tell you whether this is a good, bad, or indifferent Charolais ram in this example. So what you need to get hold of is a breed benchmark, and that tells me where the average, the top 25 and the top 10% lay, so that I can very quickly see the relative strengths and weakness of that animal. Another way that the data is often presented is in a chart format, and so I can look at hundreds of rams at a sale very, very quickly. This tells me where the average performance lies within the Charolais population. So anything this side of the line, I can see he's got good growth, he's got really good muscling, and actually a slightly positive fat, which is perhaps no bad thing with a bit of growth and a bit of muscle. So I can very quickly see his strengths and weaknesses. So this information is very readily available, and I'll show you where you can find it in a moment. So how have things changed? I've actually been doing this job for 20 years, and we've got evaluations that we started in the 1990s, and they've carried on in a fairly similar vein over that period of time, with a few adjustments. But this year we brought in some big changes to the way we evaluate terminal sires. One thing is that we now have a monthly update, so that the information is constantly updated as soon as it comes in, so that we have the latest information in front of people. We have some new traits from the CT scanner, and I'll talk about those in a moment. We've updated our breeding indexes. But one of the big changes that we've got is to adjust our carcass traits onto a weight-adjusted basis. If you think about sheep with carcass traits, how do we actually get animals with high muscle depth or high muscle depth EBVs? Well, in the past, we could get them in two ways. One is just they're big. Big sheep, big lamb, fast-growing lamb in front of the scanner, and as a result, it has quite a big muscle depth. The other way is that it's got a really big muscle depth relative to its size. Maybe it's not one of the biggest animals that we've ultrasound scanned, but a really good muscle relative to its size. Now, at the end of the day, we already have breeding values that will tell us about lamb growth rate, so we've now opted to produce carcass trait EBVs that are independent of size, so that we can assess the muscling and the fatness of lambs at a fixed weight. And at the end of the day, that actually makes good commercial sense, because when you're drawing lambs, you're not drawing them on age, you're drawing them on, let's say, 40 kilos when they're in front of you. You want to know how much muscle do they have across the loin, and how much finish, how much cover do they have. So we've changed the analyses for all of our carcass traits to have a much greater commercial focus and a much better indicator of muscling and finish as we draw lambs for slaughter. And I think I've got a nice example here. So this is one of our ram compare farms up in Yorkshire, and I'll talk about ram compare in a moment, but essentially we've chosen a range of sires to be mated on a group of relatively uniform ewes, collected the data from those. And as it happened, there were quite a few Charolais on this farm in this year. This was the stock ram that was already on farm, and we knew quite a lot about him. He's got relatively good growth rate, but it's bang on breed average in terms of his muscling characteristics. This was the AI ram that was put forward that I asked them to use. He's actually slightly lower in terms of scan weight, but an absolute outlier in terms of muscling relative to the size of that animal. So a really well muscled sire. Used on 40 ewes apiece, so good progeny numbers coming through. And this was the impact that we saw when it came to carcass conformation. So you can see it's not just a nudge of 5 or 10% more in one direction or the other. He actually had 50% more U-grade carcasses and no O-grade carcasses at all. So a big shift in terms of the higher value carcasses by selecting on a ram with really good muscling across the loin. And there are some other nice examples that we can tease out from the project. So it does show the value, I think, in moving muscling onto a weight-adjusted basis, even if it's taking some of my breeders, and I can see a few of them here tonight, a bit of time to get used to the new system and the re-rankings that we've seen. CT scanning technology is sort of the icing on the cake when it comes to measuring animals and getting data in. So every year we'll ultrasound scan about 40,000 lambs, measuring muscle and fat depth across the loin, but a small number will go through the CT scanning. And I'm delighted to say that because it's a mobile site, we've actually managed to put lambs from Northern Ireland through the CT scanner this year as well. So we've got pedigree flocks in Northern Ireland that benefit from the CT data. For many years we've used it to assess the lean weight, the amount of muscle in the carcass. So these are live animals going through at about 50, 60 kilos of age. We're measuring them and they go on to become the sires of the next generation. And we can assess the yield of muscle, the yield of fat in the carcass, and also an indicator of jigget shape, which we can do through using this approach. So we've had that for a number of years. But this year, we've managed to roll out some additional traits. So this is a measurement through across the loin of the animal, so the animal's on its back within the crate. This is the muscle that we would normally measure the muscle depth of. Now we can measure the total muscle area through the loin, so we've got a much better prediction of meat within that expensive part of the carcass. We've also got indicators of spine length, both in the lumbar region and in the thoracic region, and there are differences in the vertebrae number in the lumbar and the thoracic region between different sheep within a breed. So not everybody realises that you have that variation in vertebrae number. It's under genetic control, so we can produce breeding values for that as well. And the last one that we can pick up, a CT image is actually an image of density. So bone will come through as white, muscle and fat will come through as different shades of grey. If you look inside the loin, you actually can measure the density, and that's a proxy trait for intramuscular fat, which we know has an impact on meat eating quality. So it's an early stage breeding value that can help in terms of meat eating quality. So there's a raft of new CT traits that are available. And with all of those changes, we've updated our breeding indexes. So the breeding indexes are a way of ranking animals for a specific trait, but the principles still hold true. Our terminal sire index is all about sires with fast-growing lambs, with really good conformation, well-fleshed. We've also developed, even though it's for terminal sires, a maternal index for those that are keeping back female replacements that has elements of maternal ability, milk production, efficacy, and a little bit of a negative weighting of overall mature size, so we can think about efficiency. If you're making all those changes to a system, it's actually a good opportunity to rebase the figures. So just as you would in the dairy industry, they'll change the genetic base periodically. We've done exactly the same with our terminal sires. So no longer do the EBVs relate back to the 1990s. They now relate to the average animal in a breed in 2010. So it's been completely updated. And as a result, if you're looking for a specific breed, then you need your breed-specific benchmark. The figures have changed, they've been updated, and you need that information to actually help along with the charts. So lots of changes within the system. And in fact, we've actually got a new database. So for those of you that want to go and find this information, maybe you're going to a client that breeds rams and has them recorded, all the information is freely available. It's not behind any complicated logins. I can put in a bit of information about the breed I'm looking for, the first bit of their identity, and it will then very quickly drop all the animals into that flock into a screen that I can then download and take away. I can click on any of these individual records, and that will take me to another screen that will display all of the breeding values on a chart. So at a glance I can see where animals sit within a breed, and I can produce a 5-generation pedigree, or I can produce a chart to take off to a sale. So again, trying to move away from the paper and put as much information into the public domain as we can. Now this is all well and good, getting very excited about ultrasound muscle depth or growth to 8 weeks. But at the end of the day on farm, what you get paid for is the live weight of animals that you have to sell, carcass weight, conformation, fat class, and also the profitability will be influenced by days to slaughter. So one of the reasons for getting involved in RAM Compare is to try and tie together the things you get paid on with these measures of genetic merit that we produce within the pedigree flocks, the breeding values that we talked about. We know of the relationship between the two, but this gives us another opportunity to study that. And in addition to that, we've been looking to see whether we can use these abattoir traits to produce new breeding values that may be slightly more closely focused to the economics of your farm. So that's part of the reason for the RAM Compare project. So RAM Compare. Really, there's many aims of the project. We've been running, we've got year 3 results out. I'm currently measuring the lamb crop for year 4 and making mating decisions for year 5. Many aims. The first one is a comparison of rams irrespective of breed. Because every meeting that I've gone to over the last 2 decades, people have said, yeah, but tell us a bit about the breeds. And up until then, we had very clear and distinct separate breed evaluations. This has helped us understand a little bit I keep being told it's not breed compare, it's ram compare, that if you actually have 170 rams on test, you learn about both attributes. It's also to assess how well recorded rams do under commercial conditions, because sometimes the environments in which rams are grown and tested can be very different to the commercial environments in which they perform. And then thirdly, as I said, looking to see whether we can actually produce breeding values directly from the abattoir traits. It's a massive partnership between lots of different organisations, and I have to acknowledge here funding from all of the different levy bodies. Sainsbury's have been pivotal in bringing the project together, and Dunbeer and Randall Parker have done a tremendous amount of work in helping us to harvest and collect data as part of this project. And it's probably one of the largest data sets of its kind that we have access to. The farms are dotted about the country. My colleague Liz had a sense of humour when she picked the farms and put them about as far apart as she possibly could. So my summer involves quite a lot of time on the road, seeing some lovely parts of the world. Obviously we've got AFBI across here, and then farms throughout GB as well. What I should just say about these farms is they're all large units. They're all people that were already using EID, so we didn't have to tell them all about data collection. They had good data sets. They had 400 or 500 ewes, and they were prepared to have me coming in and messing about with their mating plans and saying, can you use this ram and this ram and this ram, and can you collect the data? And so really these are the guys that have done all the hard work. The ewes are relatively uniform, so some would be a complete flock of clins, some would be a complete flock of mules, but on each farm they're exactly the same or very similar ewe type. And this is the data that we collect. So starting off with insemination, we've been collecting some data on ewe weight and body condition score as part of another trial, but collecting data all the way through to birth, because at the end of the day there's no point having lambs if they're not live, vigorous lambs that are up and away and that are born easily, measuring growth rate through to 8 weeks of age and 90 days, and then collecting data from the abattoir, as well as doing some additional work where we've broken down the carcasses into primals, and we've also done some work on shear force. So uniformly cooking samples of meat and actually looking at the tenderness of those samples, seeing what variation exists, and see what genetic influences underlie that. And all of that information, is produced in the booklets, which I think are in your packs, showing where we've got to within the project, and really the trait leaders for a number of these traits. But what's the main thing we've learned from it? What are some of the take-home messages? Well, we've seen quite nicely the relationship between the muscling traits that the pedigree producers are measuring and conformation within the abattoir. The same would be true in terms of fat depth and fat class. And the other thing that's been quite striking is the relationship between the scan weight EBVs and not so much carcass weight, but actually reductions in days to slaughter. The way you can use these very high genetic merit animals for scan weight and get them away 10 days, a fortnight earlier. There are some really nice examples there showing the financial benefits, and we'll talk about some of those in a second with some AFBI data. And it's also asked some other questions from the data set. In the past, we've always made big assumptions about scan weight influencing carcass weight, but actually there's a lot more variation there than probably we expected in terms of these very fast-growing animals, how that actually converts into yield. Just very quickly, because Ori's going to talk a little bit more in a bit more detail, but a couple of nice examples of two of the top rams here within AFBI. So obviously they've only used Suffolks and Texels within this particular trial. We've used other ranges of breeds within the other farms, and I've chosen two of the top, or the top two, on their overall carcass merit index, just because it's quite a nice example of rams with different genetics getting there in different ways. So the Suffolk that's listed here really excelled out of all the rams that we used in terms of carcass weight. In this example, they were actually slightly leaner. I've got both fatter and leaner examples in both Suffolks and Texels, and also slightly less days to slaughter. The Texel underneath, in this example, happen to have higher conformation, and hence the overall financial rewards were created through the conformation, and also actually a slight improvement in terms of carcass weight. So just a nice example of different rams getting there in different ways, and depending on your particular system, one or other of these might be the ram that was better suited to that system. So that's the sort of information that we're teasing out. I very quickly threw some data together on my way over to show the relationship with value. So these dots here are the various different rams that have been used at AFBI. On this axis is what I believe their value to be from a bit of an Excel exercise using the grid seeing when they went away. And along the bottom here, we have their overall carcass merit index that we produced. So you can see quite nicely here that the genetic merit index we produced explained quite a lot of the difference that we saw in the overall lamb values. So there we go. So to summarise, I've thrown lots of information at you in a short period of time. I apologise for that, but it's just to give you a little taster of some of the things we can do and influence through genetics. I'd always encourage you to take that back to your flock to think how that will influence your performance. Think about the strengths within your flock, but also think about the weaker areas, the things that you might want to change. And genetics is a long-term process, so it's also thinking about the things you want to change within the future. Identify the EBVs of importance, get hold of the breed benchmark, and there's lots of good sources of information out there. There's more and more that's available on the internet, but we're also trying to get more in front of people when it comes to actually ram buying. So there we go. And I haven't touched upon ensuring rams are fit for purpose. I could do another half an hour on that. Steve wouldn't thank me for doing another half an hour on that. But it's no point having the best genetics in the world if he does one season for you. So we do need rams that are fit for purpose. We'll do multiple seasons to repay that investment that you make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you.